I just sat down with a 9-figure CEO and reviewed his 2026 business strategy after going over his financials. And I'll tell you, this is kind of scary. This is kind of something that I'm seeing not only in 7 and 8-figure businesses, but going all the way up to 9-figure businesses. So if you're watching this video, I'm going to share with you the things you should focus on as you scale your company so that you avoid these plateaus, because this plateau is serious. The problem with this CEO is he didn't understand his equity growth strategy, meaning how is he going to build that enterprise value? He didn't understand his capital stack, meaning his financial architecture, and he didn't understand which assets in his company, which systems, which qualitative assets were valuable and which should he invest in more. Because of that, I'm making this video so that you can understand how to scale your business, how to avoid the plateaus that many companies face at different levels, and how you can get a grip on your financial destiny. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So I strongly believe that when you're looking at a business, you need to understand whether they're supply constrained or demand constrained. Does that mean that there's not enough demand for the product, or does that mean that they don't have enough product to sell? And different business models have different ways of approaching it. Whenever I come into a company and look at the financial architecture, my question is always, which one is it and how do I de-risk that? If we look at a typical business, right, you have inputs and then you have outputs, right? And then maybe there's a loop, there's a closed-end system in there. The whole point of this graph is for you to understand that there are bottlenecks that exist along the way. And those bottlenecks, this is a perfect curve. This is like looking at a normal distribution. In reality, it's more like, okay, we have a massive net and then our output is like this. Or we have a tiny net and our output is massive and it's asymmetrical. In this graph right here, these two graphs are what price elasticity actually look like. I'm misspelling elasticity. I know how to spell elastisty, elasticity, something like that. Well, look, I mean, the bottom line is your price depends on one of these two things every single time. The moment we understand that we are in a business model that will have that constraint, right? In enterprise businesses, right? It's harder to get clients, right? It's harder to get bigger clients because there's not that many that exist. In D2C, right? Direct to consumer, there's a lot of them. And typically you're constantly looking to buy more product, buy more inventory to make more sales. And then sometimes you have a missed marketing campaign or something bad happens and now you have too much inventory and then there's not enough money to spend on getting customers again, or something doesn't work out. So there's always like this balance that has to happen. And a lot of that depends fundamentally on what your business actually is. Your business is built up of equity, debt, and sweat equity. And that sweat equity impacts how you look at this. Every single CEO, every single person, whether they're an employee, wherever they are built off of this foundation, right? We have this foundation right here. Your business is this massive cube, and this is the bottom of the cube. And it expands outwards, but it's built on this foundation. And depending on where you're at in your price elasticity or where you're at in your supply demand curve will depend whether you need more debt or you need more equity in your business. Because debt can be expensive. It can be too little, too late. So certain business models, right, more direct to consumer, they need a lot of equity because you need to front the cost of all of this. And then enterprise level companies need more debt. A lot of enterprise businesses think they need a lot of equity, but actually they need more sweat equity and debt, in my opinion. And they only need to start going for large equity rounds when they get their first few customers, because 1 or 2 customers become your sweat equity. They improve your stack. They improve the entire business. If you make $500,000 sale from one customer and you do 3 of those in your first year, you don't really need to raise startup equity. You don't need that. You need more debt to finance sales teams, to finance all the other stuff, because you know what your cost of capital is. You know what your customer acquisition costs are. I would say that it could be the same thing here in D2C, but most of the time when you're looking at a D2C play, there's this like land and expand strategy where they say, okay, well, margins don't really matter. We just want as many customers as possible. And you see that also in SaaS, right? And just in low ticket SaaS. So it depends on the ticket price. The reason why software is so great is because it falls into both of these curves and you can build a massive enterprise value from that. That's why the multiples are so high. So the question always becomes, which portion of your financial capital stack do you want to use to de-risk your business, right? I want to reduce the risk of increasing this wide net, or I want to reduce the risk of increasing this wide output. That's really what we're building for when we talk about enterprise value, when we talk about equity growth strategies, right? That's what we're thinking about. Every time I get on a call with a founder, especially the ones that are looking for angel funding, they always ask for a lot of money without proving anything. They're never telling you which milestones they're looking to do to de-risk the business. And if you look up Mark Andreessen's onion theory of risk, he describes this exact phenomena. Most founders don't have a milestone-based approach to scaling. They don't look at it like, oh, this is the next step when I can go and justify why my thesis, my company's thesis, should be validated more with more dollars, whether that's debt or equity. And that's why you only have sweat equity when you think about it. So when we have sweat equity, right, and we don't have access to more financing and we don't have access to more investors, that's where it really shines, because now you get to build the qualitative stuff in the business that creates that brand. It creates that moat. It creates those back-end systems that actually build the enterprise value of your company. It reduces the risk because you're putting in the sweat equity. That's the only option you have left. What does that mean? That means maybe you're building sales assets, right? Maybe you're investing in training, right? And that means you might need to educate yourself and learn more about how to do sales. Maybe you need to learn more about how to do marketing. Whatever it is, the sweat equity is the growth curve. A lot of founders who become successful and go for exits or whatever it is, they always emphasize the journey, not the outcome. And the reason why they're emphasizing the journey is because they invest so much of their own sweat equity into the journey that they become fulfilled from it, because they learn so much about themselves and so much about their life because they decided, I'm going to suffer. I'm going to give my money, which is actually sweat equity, into this project, and it's going to teach me things. I'm going to take a loss, but I'm going to learn from that loss quickly and adapt. The fact that Zuckerberg was able to put, I think, $70 billion into the VR thing, or it was like 30. Yeah, I got my numbers wrong. He put in like $30 billion into the VR thing, completely tanked it, and then somehow managed to free up $40 to $70 billion in free cash flow after realizing, oh, this doesn't work. That ability to pivot doesn't come from that. Like, it doesn't come from a whim. It comes from the fact that he trusted himself and his sweat equity to know when it's time to pivot. And that's why that company is worth what it is worth, right? That's why it's a Fortune 500 company. It's because there's so much collective sweat equity, not to mention debt and, common shareholders, preferred shareholders, et cetera, and investors over decades of investment. That's why he's able to do that. And it's the same thing for a 7-figure and 8-figure entrepreneur as well. You have to decide every day, me making this YouTube video is a portion of sweat equity. Every single day, you need to choose, am I going to use debt, other people's money, or sweat equity? There's no other way around it. And when we think about sweat equity, that means strategy. That means discussing pricing. It means understanding acquire a customer, maybe unit economics, LTV. All these factors are crucial when you look at your product revenue mix. Maybe it's time to expand into a new product line. Maybe you want to pay down debt. These are all the questions you need to ask from a sweat equity standpoint. They're intangibles. They're gut decisions based on how you react to the market environment. What trends do you see coming ahead? This is sweat equity. The hardest thing about sweat equity is actually developing it to a point where it's systematic, where the company doesn't rely just on you to have that genius moment, but there's a system around how genius gets manufactured and produced across the board. What culture do you need to create? What autonomous systems do you need to create? There's a ton of that. There's a lot of team building and culture building exercises in companies from a management perspective, just to develop that amongst people. Training the younger staff to learn how to do the things that the more experienced people know how to do is crucial. This is where sweat equity is so powerful, and it's one of the most undervalued parts of building those asset-based systems that make your enterprise value so valuable. Because at the end of the day, when a company acquires another company, they're also acquiring the people, and they're acquiring the knowledge and experience and just the history of the battles and the war that happened to develop that business and that unit. And that's exactly what's happening when you build these types of asset-based systems. The more you invest in qualitative assets, the longer the tail payoff of of them. You can't measure quality. You can't measure long-term value like that. It's impossible. It's why companies are what they are. How do you measure the value of a brand, right? Oh yeah, it's the discounted cash flow, right? Like, no, it's not. It's not the present value of discounted cash flow. There's a certain, like when I say Louis Vuitton, you immediately know that's luxury. If I say Rolex, same thing. So that's the kind of thing that we're trying to build with those types of systems. And it does depend on management's decision to invest in capital stack structuring. So what does that mean? That means, let's say we ignore sweat equity for a moment. If I know that it costs me 10% to borrow, but I also know that I'm going to make 20% net profit from that 10%, I'm leveraging at a 2x. So I'm doubling my money just by doing that. Typically, you want debt for growth. But then what if I know that I want to invest in something qualitative and it's going to cost me money? I can't sweat equity it out. I can't rely on the aggregated value and knowledge of my team. I need something more. Maybe I want to buy another company that has that knowledge. Whatever it is, that's when you start raising shareholder capital, because it's more risky. And the shareholders are going to want a certain percentage of your company for doing that, but they're not going to be upset with you if the company loses money, or they'll be upset. Don't get me wrong. They're going to be upset. But legally, they have no rights to say, I'm shutting down your business or I'm putting you into bankruptcy court because you didn't pay me back, right? So whenever you have some type of speculative project, you want to go into your equity pile. And the problem with the founder I was working with was he was misusing his entire financial architecture. He didn't understand his price elasticity. He was like, oh yeah, let me just keep spending on ads. He didn't build enough recurring. He didn't build enough brand trust with the customers. It was kind of like this churn and burn model. And he didn't understand when he should use each financial tool. So the goal is for you as a business owner, you can replicate it because capitalism works in every single layer of the market. You need to think about, when can I raise equity? When should I take on debt? And when should I just tough it out and work on sweat equity? And a lot of big companies get lazy and don't care about the sweat equity anymore. And that's why they plateau. That's why they don't grow as fast. It's because they stop thinking like startup founders and they start thinking like people who are just collecting money like a cash cow. And if you don't have that innovative mindset where you're constantly thinking about new products, new developments, new ideas, you're thinking about, oh, how do I reduce this? How do I make this better? How do I improve the team? How do I make everybody happy? If you're not thinking about everything else besides yourself, you're not going to have the same results as these Fortune 500 company CEOs. If you're just thinking about cash and spending and affording your lifestyle, you're not going to get as far. You'll get far. There's this book called A Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he talks about what makes a company great. And he found that owner's equity or management compensation, the structuring, had nothing to do with how successful a company actually was. The one driver of company success was whether you had a leader who recognized everybody around them and was willing to put the group before himself. They were always searching for truth. They would always get the job done and try their hardest to get things moving. Now, I'm summarizing it. There's like a 5-step process in the book. I highly recommend you read it. But from a purely analytical, if you want to have a framework approach to how to do this, you need to think about where your business actually is, what business you're in and who you're serving, and how to actually apply your sweat equity, debt, and equity structures appropriately. This is where most founders plateau because they don't have that type of thinking and they don't know how to zoom into each capital stack to think about that. If we're thinking about revenue, where is revenue getting derived from? How are we investing into it? Are we investing into revenue from sweat equity, debt, or equity? What about our costs, right? Direct labor costs, direct costs of goods, variable expenses, marketing expenses. Where are we financing that from? The deeper you go, the more analytical you become about your statement of cash flows, your P&Ls, and your balance sheet, the more your business will click to you. I show founders this all the time. So if you'd like to learn or book a call with me and see how we can do this, we're taking on 2 or 3 more clients this quarter. So click on the link in the description below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and do all the other things that people do on YouTube. And I'll see you in the next video.